The moment I stepped into that hotel room, Calder's hands already pulling me close, I thought I'd gotten away with it. I didn't know that Victor, my husband, was sitting in his car just outside, watching it all unfold. I told Victor I was going to visit Ava, an old college roommate who'd just moved back to the state. It wasn't a complete lie. Ava did exist. I even texted her beforehand to let her know I'd listed her as my alibi, just in case Victor decided to check. Victor didn't ask many questions when I brought up the trip, which wasn't like him. Usually he'd grill me about logistics, how long I'd be gone, whether I'd packed everything, if I'd checked the car's oil before driving out of town. But this time he just gave me a long, unreadable look and said, "Have fun." Something about the way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck prickle. But I brushed it off. Victor was always uptight, always overly serious. He probably thought he was doing me a favor by pretending he didn't care. But that look lingered in my mind the entire 2-hour drive to the hotel. By the time I arrived, Calder was already waiting for me in the lobby. It had been years since I'd seen him, but he looked the same. Better, even. His hair was longer now, streaked with just enough gray to make him look distinguished. He was wearing a leather jacket over a dark button-down, his usual effortless charm practically radiating off him. When he saw me, his face broke into that crooked smile I'd never forgotten, the one that used to make me weak in the knees. And for a moment, I felt like I was 25 again, reckless and unburdened by the weight of adulthood. "Mara," he said, his voice warm and teasing as he pulled me into a hug. "You look even better than I remembered." "You're a terrible liar," I said, laughing softly. But his eyes told me he meant it, and my cheeks flushed despite myself. Dinner was everything I'd imagined it would be. We sat on the rooftop of the hotel, the city lights glittering below us, the wine flowing too easily. Calder was as confident and magnetic as ever, leaning in close as he told stories about his latest adventures, his hand occasionally brushing mine across the table. "I still can't believe you agreed to meet me," he said, his voice low. "Why wouldn't I?" I asked, taking another sip of wine to steady myself. "Because," he said, his eyes locking onto mine, "you've got a life now, a husband, responsibilities, and yet, here you are." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Calder's gaze was too intense, too knowing. He leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Don't worry," he said, his tone playful but with an edge. "I'm glad you did." By the time we made it back to the hotel room, my heart was pounding for all the wrong reasons. Calder closed the door behind us, and before I could say a word, his hands were on me. His touch firm, his lips brushing against mine, with a confidence that left no room for hesitation. "God, I missed this," he murmured, his voice rough as his hands slid down to my waist, pulling me closer. I didn't stop him, I didn't want to. For years, I'd felt invisible, just another piece of furniture in the perfectly curated life Victor had built for us. But with Calder, I felt seen, wanted, alive. I knew it was wrong. I knew I'd hate myself in the morning. But in that moment, I didn't care. What I didn't know was that Victor had been following me the entire time. He saw us on the rooftop, laughing and leaning into each other like lovers who'd never drifted apart. He followed us to the elevator, his phone recording as Calder's hand rested possessively on the small of my back. And when we entered the room, Victor didn't leave. He sat in his car, parked just outside the hotel, the glow of his phone screen illuminating his face as he watched the recording he'd just taken. And then he sent Calder a text. Calder always had a way of pulling me out of myself, making me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten. But even as I laughed at his jokes and lost myself in his touch, there was a knot in my stomach I couldn't ignore. Somewhere out there, Victor was waiting. The room was quiet, except for the muffled hum of city traffic outside the window. The lights were dim, casting a warm glow over the soft, luxurious bedding. Calder stood in front of me, his hands resting lightly on my hips, his lips curled into that mischievous smile I remembered so well. "You're nervous," he said, his voice low, teasing. "No, I'm not," I lied, though the tremor in my voice betrayed me. He tilted his head, his eyes scanning my face. "You always were a terrible liar, Mara." I tried to laugh, but the sound came out weak. Calder's hands tightened slightly, grounding me, and for a moment, I let myself relax. "It's been a long time," I said finally, my voice softer now. "Too long," he agreed. He leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. But I'm glad you're here. You have no idea how much I've missed you. His words sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt my resolve slipping. There was something about Calder that made me reckless, that made me forget about the consequences. With him, it was always like this. Intense, all-consuming, like the rest of the world didn't exist. His lips found mine, and the kiss was soft at first, almost hesitant. But it quickly deepened, his hands moving up my back, pulling me closer until there was no space between us. My heart raced as his fingers traced the edge of my blouse, sliding it off my shoulders with a practiced ease. His touch was confident, familiar, and I couldn't stop the small gasp that escaped my lips. "Still as beautiful as ever," he murmured, his voice rough with desire. I wanted to respond, to tell him he hadn't changed either, but the words were lost as his mouth moved to my neck, leaving a trail of heat in its wake. By the time we reached the bed, my thoughts were a blur. I wasn't thinking about Victor or the risk I was taking or the mess I was making of my life. All I could focus on was the way Calder made me feel. Alive, wanted, free. We tumbled onto the mattress, the crisp hotel sheets cool against my skin. Calder's hands explored my body with a mix of urgency and reverence, like he was rediscovering every inch of me. "You're even more beautiful than I remember," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know how to respond to that. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, to remind him that I wasn't the same carefree girl he used to know. But another part of me, the part that craved his attention, his validation, soaked in the words like they were the truth. Hours passed in a haze of stolen moments and rediscovered intimacy. Calder had always been intense, and that hadn't changed. He moved like he knew exactly what he was doing, his confidence infectious. But as the passion ebbed and we lay tangled in the sheets, the reality of what I'd done began to creep in. Calder rested his head against the pillow, his arm draped casually over my waist. He looked at me with a lazy, satisfied smile, but I could see the flicker of something else in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe even doubt. "What's going through that head of yours?" he asked, his voice soft. "Nothing," I said quickly, turning onto my side to avoid his gaze. "Mara," he said, his tone more serious now. "Talk to me." I hesitated, chewing on my bottom lip. It's complicated. "It doesn't have to be," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "You don't owe him anything, you know." "Victor's my husband," I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "And?" Calder's voice was calm but firm. "Does he make you happy?" I didn't answer. Calder sighed, pulling me closer until my head rested against his chest. "You deserve to be happy, Mara. You deserve to be with someone who sees you, who appreciates you." His words stung because they were true. Victor and I hadn't been happy in years, but I'd convinced myself that was just part of marriage. Something you endured, not something you escaped from. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Calder tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his gaze. "You're following your heart," he said. "And there's nothing wrong with that." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this was more than just an affair, that it meant something. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The night passed too quickly. By the time the sun began to rise, I felt the weight of the weekend pressing down on me. Calder was still asleep, his arm draped over me, his breathing steady and calm. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake him, and stood by the window, staring out at the city below. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to imagine what life could be like with Calder. Free from the routine and constraints of my marriage, full of passion and spontaneity. But then my phone buzzed on the nightstand, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Victor. "We need to talk when you get home." My stomach dropped, and I suddenly felt cold despite the warmth of the room. I didn't tell Calder about the text. Instead, I kissed him goodbye and promised to call him later, even though I wasn't sure if I'd ever see him again. As I drove home, the excitement and passion of the weekend faded, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. Victor never sent texts like that, not unless something was wrong. And as I pulled into the driveway of our perfect suburban home, I realized that I hadn't gotten away with anything. The second I walked through the door, Victor's silence hit me harder than any accusation could have. He didn't yell, didn't demand answers. He didn't need to. He knew. And worse, I knew he knew. The house was eerily quiet when I stepped inside. No TV blaring in the background, no clinking of dishes in the sink, just silence. Victor was always home by this time, but the emptiness felt ominous. I set my bag down carefully, like a burglar sneaking back into her own life, and called out his name. Victor? Nothing. I breathed out, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe he'd stepped out to run an errand. Maybe he was working late at the office. Maybe he'd just sent that text to mess with me because he liked to keep me on edge. But when I walked into the kitchen, my stomach dropped. The phone was sitting on the counter. His phone. Victor never left the house without it. I tried to act normal, moving through the house like everything was fine. I changed into sweatpants, threw a frozen meal into the microwave, and even turned on the news, hoping the sound of the anchor's droning voice would calm my nerves. But it didn't. Because I couldn't shake the feeling that Victor wasn't out running errands or working late. He was waiting. Watching. The text replayed in my mind, the 5 words looping over and over again. We need to talk when you get home. The microwave beeped, but I didn't move. I just stared at the screen, my hands gripping the edge of the counter, my pulse pounding in my ears. And then I heard the front door open. He didn't slam it. Victor never slammed doors. He shut it quietly, deliberately, the sound of it clicking shut sending a chill down my spine. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice casual. He walked into the kitchen a moment later, his expression unreadable. He looked calm, too calm, but there was something in his eyes that made my stomach twist. "You're home," I said, forcing a smile. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned against the counter, his arms crossed over his chest, and just stared at me. "How was Ava?" he asked finally, his tone light, almost conversational. My throat tightened. "She's good," I said quickly. "We had a great time catching up." He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "That's nice. I'm sure she appreciated the visit." The way he said it, calm, measured, too controlled, made my heart race. "Victor, is everything okay?" I asked, feigning innocence. He tilted his head, studying me like I was some kind of puzzle he was trying to solve. "Why wouldn't it be?" "I don't know," I said, trying to laugh, but the sound came out weak. "You just seem off." "Off," he repeated, his tone thoughtful. "No, Mara, I'm fine. But you? You've had quite the weekend, haven't you?" The words hit me like a slap, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. "What are you talking about?" His lips curved into a small, humorless smile. "You really think I don't know?" My mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation, a lie, anything to deflect. But Victor didn't give me the chance. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. My stomach twisted as he unlocked it, his fingers moving with slow precision, and held it out to me. "Go ahead," he said, his voice icy. "Press play." My hand trembled as I took the phone. The screen was bright, showing a video file with a timestamp from the night before. I hesitated, my heart pounding, and looked up at him. His expression didn't change. "Press play." The video started, and my worst fears were confirmed. There I was, sitting across from Calder at the rooftop restaurant, laughing as he leaned in close, his hand brushing against mine. The camera zoomed in as Calder kissed my hand, the intimacy unmistakable. The video cut to us entering the elevator together, Calder's arm around my waist, my head resting against his shoulder. And then, the final scene, Calder opening the door to our hotel room, pulling me inside, his hands already on me. I stopped the video before it could go any further, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. "Victor," I whispered, tears burning in my eyes. Don't," he said sharply, cutting me off. "I don't want to hear your excuses." I stood there, frozen, as Victor took the phone from me and slipped it back into his pocket. His calmness was more terrifying than any shouting or anger could have been. "How long?" he asked. "What?" "How long has it been going on?" he repeated, his tone colder now. "It's not," I started, but he raised a hand, silencing me. "Don't lie to me, Mara, not anymore. How long?" "Just this weekend," I said quickly, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "It was a mistake. It won't happen again." Victor laughed, a low, bitter sound that made my chest ache. "You think I believe that?" He stepped closer, his presence suffocating, and leaned in until our faces were inches apart. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you know what it feels like to watch your wife throw herself at another man? To watch her walk into a hotel room with him, like I don't even exist?" I'm sorry, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Sorry? He repeated, his eyes narrowing. You're not sorry, Mara. You're just scared you got caught. His words cut deep, but I couldn't argue. He was right. Victor straightened up, his expression hardening. You should know, he said coldly, that I'm not the only one who's seen this. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? He pulled out his phone again, his fingers swiping across the screen. I sent the video to a few people. Your parents, for one, and that new client of yours, what's his name? Brian? No, I breathed, my voice barely audible. You didn't. Oh, I did, he said, his smile devoid of warmth. And if you think that's the worst of it, you're wrong. Because this is just the beginning, Mara. You wanted to betray me? Fine. But now you get to live with the consequences. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My chest ached, my vision blurred with tears, and I couldn't think straight. Victor didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, broken and alone. And as the full weight of what he'd done crashed down on me, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. I thought the worst was behind me. Victor had the evidence, my life was already unraveling, but at least Calder would be there. That was the one thing I clung to, that he cared. I couldn't have been more wrong. The day after Victor confronted me was a blur of shame and panic. He didn't yell, didn't threaten divorce, but his calm, venomous control was worse. The video had already reached my parents by the time I woke up. My mother called, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. How could you do this, Mara? She whispered, her words cutting through me like glass. To him. To yourself. Do you know what people are going to say? I didn't have an answer. I didn't even try to defend myself. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. My coworkers were whispering behind my back, my phone buzzed relentlessly with texts from Victor's family members, and I knew I had to talk to someone. Him. Calder had to know what was happening. I drove to the cafe where Calder and I had agreed to meet that morning. It was a small place tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, and I hoped the isolation would give us some privacy. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with his coffee untouched. He looked up as I approached, his face unreadable. Normally, Calder's expressions were open, charming, but today there was a flicker of something colder in his eyes. Mara, he said, his tone cautious. Calder, I need to talk to you, I said, sitting down across from him. My hands trembled as I reached for my coffee, desperate for something to hold on to. I know, he said, cutting me off. Victor texted me. My stomach twisted. What did he say? Calder leaned back, his jaw tightening. Enough. He knows about us, Mara. He sent me a video. My heart stopped. He sent it to you? Yes, Calder said sharply, lowering his voice as he leaned forward. And he said that if I didn't back off, he'd send it to my wife. The word hit me like a slap. Your wife? Calder's eyes flicked away, and I realized he'd been holding back more than I'd thought. You're married? I whispered, my voice breaking. It's complicated, he said, running a hand through his hair. Don't you dare, I hissed, my shame and fury bubbling over. You let me think. I didn't let you think anything, he snapped, his voice harder now. You didn't ask, and I didn't tell. You're not exactly innocent here, Mara. The words stung, but I pushed past them. Victor sent the video to my family, Calder, my clients. My life is falling apart, and you're telling me you've got a wife? Calder's jaw clenched. Look, I didn't know it was going to come to this. I didn't think Victor was capable of pulling something like this. He's insane. He's insane? I said, my voice rising. No, Calder, he's calculated, and now he's dragging both of us down. For a moment, Calder didn't respond. He just sat there, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Finally, he sighed, shaking his head. I can't do this, he said, standing abruptly. What? I asked, my voice trembling. I can't be part of this, he said, his tone firmer now. Victor's already on the warpath, and I'm not going to let him ruin my life too. I stood as well, grabbing his arm. You're seriously walking away? After everything? He turned to me, his expression cold. This was a mistake, Mara. All of it. The words hit me harder than I expected, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. So that's it? I asked, my voice breaking. You're just going to leave me to deal with this alone? Calder hesitated, his jaw tightening. I have to think about my family, my business. I can't get dragged into your mess. My mess? I said, my voice shaking with anger. You were part of this too, Calder. Don't pretend like you didn't know exactly what you were doing. He didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, my necklace, the one Victor had given me on our anniversary years ago. I hadn't even noticed it was missing. I thought this might mean something to you, he said, holding it out. I stared at it, my hands trembling. Why do you have that? You left it at the hotel, he said simply. Figured you'd want it back. The gesture felt hollow, almost mocking. I snatched the necklace from his hand, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and heartbreak. Goodbye, Mara, Calder said, his voice softer now, almost apologetic. And just like that, he walked out, leaving me standing there, alone in the middle of the cafe, clutching the necklace like it was the only thing holding me together. I don't know how long I stood there staring at the door long after Calder had disappeared. The weight of everything hit me at once. Victor's betrayal, Calder's cowardice, the wreckage of my life spreading further with every passing moment. By the time I left the cafe, my legs felt like they were moving on autopilot. I got into my car and sat there, staring at the steering wheel as tears streamed down my face. This was my fault. All of it. I'd let my unhappiness, my selfishness, my weakness lead me down a path I couldn't come back from. But as I sat there, something inside me shifted. Anger replaced the sadness, a quiet, simmering rage that burned away the tears. Victor thought he'd won. Calder thought he could walk away unscathed. They were both wrong. Victor didn't scream, didn't throw things, didn't even raise his voice. He didn't have to. His cold, calculated moves were far worse, and when I thought he'd done his worst, he found another way to destroy me. When I got home that night, the house was too quiet. Victor was in the living room, sitting on the couch with a glass of scotch in his hand, his phone resting on the coffee table. The screen glowed faintly, and I could see he'd been watching something, the video. He didn't look at me when I walked in. He just swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the sound deafening in the silence. Sit, he said finally, his voice calm, detached. I hesitated for a moment before obeying, lowering myself onto the chair across from him. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. I spoke to your mother today, Victor began, still not looking at me. She had a lot to say about her daughter's behavior. Do you know what she said? I swallowed hard, shaking my head. She said she's ashamed of you, he continued, his voice as cold as the look in his eyes when he finally turned to face me. She said she can't believe the woman she raised would stoop this low. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Crying wouldn't help me here. Nothing would. That wasn't enough though, he said, leaning back against the couch, so I made sure a few other people saw the video, just to drive the point home. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Victor, what did you do? He smiled, and the sight of it chilled me to my core. Your new client, Brian? The one you've been working so hard to impress? He picked up his phone and tapped the screen. He's seen it, got the email this morning. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Brian was one of the most influential clients my firm had ever landed. If he'd seen the video, my career was over. You didn't, I whispered, my voice trembling. Oh, I did, Victor said smoothly. And I made sure he knew exactly who he was dealing with. Do you think he wants to work with someone like you now? Someone who can't even keep her personal life together? I couldn't breathe. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air thick with the weight of everything I was losing. You're ruining me, I said, my voice breaking. No, Mara, Victor said, setting his glass down on the table. You ruined yourself. I'm just making sure you feel the consequences. Why are you doing this? I asked, tears streaming down my face now. What do you want from me? Victor leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes locking onto mine. What I want, he said slowly, is for you to understand what you've done, to feel what I felt when I watched that video, the humiliation, the betrayal, the rage. I made a mistake, I said, my voice trembling. I know that. I'm sorry, Victor, I'll do anything to fix this. He tilted his head, studying me like I was some kind of experiment. Anything? Yes, I said desperately. He leaned back again, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Then here's what's going to happen, he said. You're going to stay here, in this house, and you're going to do exactly what I say. No more lies, no more secrets. You're gonna be the perfect wife. Obedient, attentive, quiet. And if I don't? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Victor's smile widened. If you don't, I'll send the video to everyone, your entire contact list, your boss, your coworkers, every single one of your clients, and I'll make sure it's uploaded to every platform I can find. I felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath me. He wasn't bluffing. I could see it in his eyes. He'd already burned my bridges with my family and my clients, and he wouldn't hesitate to burn the rest. You're a monster, I whispered. Victor laughed, the sound devoid of humor. No, Mara. I'm just a man who's been pushed too far. The days that followed were a living hell. Victor didn't have to scream or threaten me anymore. The silent power he held over me was enough. He controlled everything. What I wore, where I went, even who I spoke to. My phone was no longer my own. He checked it daily, scrolling through my messages and emails, deleting anything he deemed unnecessary. At night he would sit in the living room, drinking his scotch and watching the video on his phone like it was some kind of trophy. He never said anything about it, but the faint sound of it playing from the other room was enough to send me spiraling. I was trapped, suffocating under the weight of his control, and I didn't see any way out. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard Victor's voice from the living room. At first, I thought he was talking to someone on the phone, but as I listened more closely, I realized he was talking to himself. She'll break eventually, he said, his voice low but sharp. They always do. The words sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let him destroy me. But if I left, he would follow through on his threats. He'd ruin my career, my relationships, my entire life. I had no idea what to do. The next morning, I found myself standing in the bathroom staring at my reflection. My face was pale, my eyes hollow, and for the first time, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. This wasn't who I wanted to be. Victor thought he'd won. He thought he'd broken me, that I was too scared to fight back. But he was wrong. Victor thought I was beaten, that I'd just lie down and let him control me forever. But as I stood in the doorway of our home, a suitcase in one hand and his threats hanging over my head, I realized something. I'd rather lose everything than let him win. For days, I lived like a shadow in my own house. Victor's rules suffocated me, his gaze always sharp, always calculating, like he was waiting for me to crack. He never laid a hand on me, never raised his voice, but his control was total. He didn't need to hit me to break me. He was breaking me piece by piece with every demand, every cold smile. I played my part, biting my tongue when he barked out instructions, keeping my head down while he scrolled through my phone. But inside, I was planning. Every quiet moment, every sleepless night, I was calculating my next move. I couldn't stay. I wouldn't stay. It was a Wednesday evening when I made my decision. Victor was out late, probably meeting a client or sitting in a bar somewhere nursing his scotch, and the house was silent. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands trembling as I stared at the small flash drive I'd hidden in my purse. I'd copied everything. Emails, texts, even screenshots of the video Victor had sent to my mother and Brian. If Victor wanted to ruin me, I'd make sure I took him down with me. It wasn't enough to just leave. I needed leverage. The first thing I did was call Brian, my client. I'd avoided his calls for days, too ashamed to face him after Victor's stunt, but now I needed him more than ever. Brian, I said when he answered, my voice steady despite the panic bubbling beneath the surface. I need your help. There was a long pause on the other end. Mara, I don't think we should be talking, after what your husband sent me. It was a lie, I cut in, my voice sharp. Victor twisted everything to punish me. He's using that video to blackmail me, to control me. Another pause. You have proof? Yes, I said, gripping the flash drive in my hand, but I need someone I can trust to help me. Someone who can make sure Victor doesn't get away with this. Brian sighed, his tone softening. Come to my office tomorrow. We'll figure this out. I hung up the phone, my heart pounding. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next step was packing. I waited until the early hours of the morning when Victor was asleep, and quietly slipped out of bed. I moved through the house like a ghost, gathering clothes, my laptop, anything I couldn't live without. I'd planned to leave that morning, to get in my car and never look back. But as I reached for my suitcase, Victor's voice stopped me in my tracks. Going somewhere? I turned slowly, my blood running cold as I saw him standing in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked calm, but his eyes burned with anger. I was just... Spare me the lies, Mara, he said, stepping closer. You think I didn't know this was coming? You think I haven't been watching you? My chest tightened as he pulled out his phone, holding it up for me to see. On the screen was a live feed from the security cameras he'd installed around the house. You're predictable, he said, his voice low. I've been waiting for you to try this. I forced myself to stand tall, meeting his gaze despite the fear clawing at my throat. I can't stay here, Victor, I said, my voice trembling but firm. I won't. He smirked, slipping the phone into his pocket. You won't? And where exactly do you think you're going to go? To Calder? Oh wait, he left you, didn't he? Or maybe to your family? Because last I checked, they don't want anything to do with you. His words stung, but I didn't let them show. I'll figure it out, I said. I'd rather lose everything than stay here and let you control me. Victor's expression darkened and he took another step closer. You think you have a choice, Mara? You think you can just walk out that door and start over? If you leave, I'll make sure there's nothing left of your life to rebuild. For a moment, his words froze me in place. He'd already destroyed so much, my family, my reputation, my career. But as I stood there, staring at the man I'd once loved, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. You've already taken everything, I said, my voice steady now. There's nothing left for you to destroy. Victor's smirk faltered, just for a second, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. You think you're strong enough to do this? He said, his voice colder now. You're not. You're nothing without me, Mara. Maybe, I said, stepping past him, my suitcase in hand. But I'd rather be nothing than stay here and let you destroy me. I walked out the door before he could stop me, my heart pounding as I stepped into the cool night air. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what came next. But as I drove away from the house that had felt like a prison for so long, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom.